Okay, so when we're doing a repair in the fabric where we've got an actual hole, we're going to need a patch. So the first thing that we're going to do is calculate the size of our patch and get our patch ready. So the first thing you want to do is actually measure your hole so that you know how big your patch needs to be. Um, and depending on the type of hole, you may need to measure its length and its width. So, in the case of the hole we have on our zoo shirts for our samples, you're just going to have a height measurement. So, mine is about 1.5. If I were to measure the width of the hole, obviously it's 0 because it's kind of just a slice in the fabric. If I had a round hole, I would want to measure across as well. The next thing we're going to do is calculate the size of our patch. So we want our patch to attach about 1/2 inch away from our hole onto kind of the stable fabric where it's not compromised by our hole. So we want our patch to be at least 1/2 inch bigger on each side from the edge of our hole. And then we're also going to need a 1/2 inch seam allowance on our patch to fold under so we have a nice edge. So once I know my measurement, I'm going to need to add 2 inches to that measurement to figure out the size of my patch. So since my width measurement is 0 because it comes together, the width of my patch is going to need to be 2 inches. I'm going to need 1 inch on this side so that I can fold 1/2 inch under and still have the edge of that patch be 1/2 inch away from my edge. And I'll need another inch on this side so I can fold under 1/2 inch and have 1/2 inch of patch away from the edge. This direction, my measurement, my hole was 1.5 inches. So again, I'm going to add 2 inches and that'll give me 1/2 inch from the top of my rip plus 1/2 inch to use a seam allowance, 1/2 inch from the bottom of my rip, and 1/2 inch to use for seam allowance. If you're having a hard time wrapping your brain around that, just remember measure the width of your hole, the length of your hole, and add 2 inches to each of those measurements, and that will give you the size of your patch. So, my patch that I'm showing you on today is a little bit bigger than what my hole actually requires so that you can see a little bit better what I'm doing as I prepare the patch. And you can go with a bigger patch, and you just want to make sure that the minimum size of patch is at least 2 inches bigger than your hole in each direction. So the first thing that we're going to do is mark and fold under our seam allowances so that we have a nice finished edge. And we're going to do 1/2 inch seam allowance for our sample. You can do, if you're patching out in the real world, you can do 1/4 inch seam allowance, but it'll be a little bit harder to fold under and get nice corners. So especially if you're new to this, I would recommend a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So once I've got those marked, I'm going to fold my seam allowance towards the back, and I'm just going to kind of press it with my fingers. And you don't necessarily have to mark with your pen your exact seam allowance. If you want to measure it with your ruler and just fold it over immediately, you can do that. But when you're first starting out, a lot of times it's easier to mark the seam allowance. And it's actually sometimes easier to mark on the right side of the fabric so that you can see it as you're folding. I marked on the wrong side, and it can be a bit challenging to see my line as I fold, but either way works. Okay, so once I have it folded and kind of just pressed with my fingers and given a little bit of a crease, I'm going to take it to my iron and I'm going to give it an actual good pressing. Okay, so once I've pressed those edges and they're nice and crisp, I'm actually going to unfold my corners so that I can fold them in a way that reduces a little bit of bulk. So looking at each corner, you should see, as you open it up, you should be able to see the crease where it's folded. And I'm going to mark mine just so you can see them a little bit better on the camera. You don't necessarily have to do this if you can see them well on your fabric. So once I have identified those creases, I'm going to trim off the corner from that the corner of that crease at the edge to this crease at the edge. So this kind of diagonal line in between those two creases, I'm going to trim off. And that's going to help reduce the bulk when I fold the corner. Now, I want the corner to be folded in here. In order to get a nice, neat corner, I'm going to fold diagonally right at that point where my creases intersect. So if you look at where I've marked, I'm going to fold diagonally right along this line so that my line goes through that intersection of the creases. Once I have that folded down, then I'm going to bring each side in and just allow them to go back to where they creased as I pressed earlier. And you may find that you need to hold that corner closed with a pin. Even with the pressing that we did, it may not want to stay flat. So I'm just going to put a pin there to hold it. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing to all 4 of my corners. So I'm going to open it up, find my crease, cut diagonally to lose that corner. I'm going to fold down at a diagonal, fold each side in. And then I'm going to pin it so it stays closed. I'm going to trim, fold, 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 and pin. Once I've got all 4 of those corners folded and I've reduced the bulk, you can take it back to your iron and give those new creases or those new folds a good press so that they hold their crease. But your patch is ready to go.